I have been seeking to promote a reevaluation of our thinking about cases involving race that takes these perspectives into account. That starts from the desirability of promoting this notion of deep human dignity and interconnectedness, but moves further into a reconsideration of what it means to be discriminated against, what it means to suffer a racialized injury, to grapple with the fears of human disconnect and lack of mutual recognition and failure of mutual affirmation that are behind these claims that we consider to be claims of discrimination, hate crimes, and that sort of thing. To really sort of, in other words, push us in the direction of really fleshing out what is it that gives rise to these claims, how do they harm not just the individuals before us, but the society around us, and how might a reconceptualization of these types of harms with a view towards what it means to be a human being and what our aspirations are for us as humans and community. How might we transform the way of thinking about the law to kind of embody those aspirations? It's been my project. And so I've been writing in ways that I hope will encourage others, right? And I'm aware that others are writing in other areas as well. All of us aiming to sort of both encourage other professors to begin thinking outside of the boxes that we were taught to use to analyze these sorts of claims in ways that would help bring a reevaluation of the law itself, the doctrine itself, alive, and bring that project into the fore, into legal education more broadly, into the courtrooms that we practice in. So that is a formidable challenge, and it's one that, without some sense that you're not alone, is in fact, would be hard to be doing. So I have been gratified by the fact that I've been working both directly and indirectly with other law professors, with Peter Gable, with others who have been engaged in similar projects. As another example in terms of a way in which doctrine might be reinterpreted to reflect these notions of humanity and consciousness, or, if you will, a broader sort of spiritual, political consciousness. If you take the law of torts, every first-year law student is taught about the long-standing rule, like common law, which states that you have no duty to rescue a person who's in distress, absent certain limited exceptions that might apply in certain circumstances. But a central rule of torts that students are taught every fall is that you have no duty to rescue another person who's in distress. I think that doctrinal position, again, it's one of those rules of thinking about legal rules that structure a component of torts, and within that, negligence law, right? We've got a legal framework that sort of supports this. This particular rule is an example of the way in which the rules themselves embed values in this sort of quiet way that lead to a perpetuation of our sense of ourselves as alienated, disconnected individuals, self-acting always, first and foremost. So much so that if a child is lying on a railroad tracks, we have to put it in these stark terms in the hypotheticals we teach, there's no duty, no obligation that law will impose to do something to help that child, even if you could do so without putting any danger to yourself. The fact that we teach this routinely in law school and teach the ways in which the law traditionally justifies that position is, on the one hand, required by the work that we do to sort of enable our students to be effective lawyers in the world today. On the other hand, I believe perpetuates, again, this kind of way in which the legal doctrine itself embeds a set of values and a set of aspirational objectives, really, that does keep us embedded in our isolated communities, our sense of ourselves as actually alienated and in need of the protection of this, the law, something bigger than ourselves. So even in that space, on the one hand, I have to teach what the law is right now, because that's what one has to do, and what our students expect us to do to enable them to practice in the world. But at the same time, I try to create a little space in that discussion for grappling with the underlying assumptions in that doctrine, that we are individuals, that we are self-interested, that it may be more important to us to be free, to not help another person, than it might be to us as a society to encourage that we help if we can. I encourage then a little bit of discussion in a long course, a little bit of discussion about the underlying notion that perhaps, or the underlying idea that maybe there's something in the human being that's being denied in this doctrine. Maybe there's an underlying impulse toward helping another person, an underlying impulse toward love, toward recognition of our interconnectedness, altruism, if you will, that the legal framework prohibits, doesn't allow to flourish in the world. And so by just the process of trying to create a little space in the traditional law school classroom for surfacing these submerged, if you will, alternative ways of viewing the world, I see myself as furthering the objectives of this movement in a way that is legitimately within the scope of what I'm allowed to do as a law professor. And so I'm looking for, always as a professor, I'm looking for ways to kind of do what I must do in terms of teaching the current doctrine, but also shine a little bit of light on whatever opportunities the current doctrine does provide and the current framework may provide on the ways in which we might reevaluate this doctrine, the ways in which we as conscious, thoughtful practitioners might participate in the transformation of the doctrine itself in ways that might bring about a different way of being with each other in the world. So in addition to working with those who have been involved in the project for integrating spirituality, law, and politics, I've also been looking at ways of addressing that spiritual vacuum, if you will, that we all kind of carry within ourselves, having survived, whether successfully or not, training and education and indoctrination into kind of the norms and expectations of modern contemporary American society. In other words, there's a void that I was feeling, a sense of the void in my own life that I felt had been kind of a consequence of the education that I received so well and the work that I was doing. And for me, that led to a desire to really provide some support for that part of me that goes beyond the kind of, the material, the physical, the external measures of success. And it got me thinking back to the spiritual traditions that I'd grown up with, the ways in which, having been the child of a family of kind of Southern Baptists from a fundamentalist position out in North Carolina, how that background had supported me in this movement, actually, by embedding in me from very, very early on this sort of felt sense that we really are just one family. I remember my grandmother, who was a kind of an itinerant minister. She got called to preach at a certain point, and she preached. She never had a church, but Nanny Suggs, which is her name, would preach and would speak to the deep interconnectedness of all human beings. And that was the key point of hers that I think internalized very early on.